Hello, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Harry Osiris, and this is my YouTube channel, grecochess. I will continue the series of presenting games suggested to me by my Facebook friends. And now it is the turn of Alexander Indjic from Serbia. He was the 2024 European Chess Championship, and he's a Grandmaster. His opponent was Frode Elsness. He is an international master from Norway, and the game took place in my own home country, Greece, at Porto, Carras. The year was 2018. When they played, Frode Elsness had a rating of 2450, while Alexander Indjic had 2604, so clearly Alexander has a favorite. Since then, Frode has fallen a little bit to 2418, while Alexander's rating has raised a little bit from 2604 to 2635. In fact, Alexander has suggested two games to show. This is the first of them. In the next video, we'll show the second one. But let's go now to the board of chess.com and share with you the screen and see what exactly happened. How did the game evolve? Here we are. Just to tell you that Frode Elsness, his opponent, had the white pieces, while my Facebook friend Alexander Indjic had the black pieces. Once again, on the left half of the screen, you're going to see the chessboard with the moves. I'm going to enter them. I'll copy them from the score sheet one by one. And on the right half, which is analysis, you're going to see the computer evaluation. Positive number means white is doing better. Negative number means black is doing better. Computer will tell us whether the move played was the best of all, and if not, which would have been the best move, and which are the top 5 moves of the other player whose turn is to come. And we start the game. With Frode, starting with his d pawn, he sends it to d4. Together with the e4 are the two most popular opening moves. Usually e4 is a little bit more popular, but both are equally valid. And this is called the queen's pawn opening. You'll see here the names of the various openings as the game evolves. Now Alexander is going to place his knight to f6. This is called the Indian game. The reason being that because in the very old times when the pieces moved differently in India, this was a very common move. The two most popular moves for black when white plays the pawn to d4 are either the symmetric pawn to d5 or the knight to f6, like now. And if white starts with the d pawn going to d4, usually the second move is the c pawn goes to c4. Second move for Alexander, pawn to e6. This is now called the East Indian defense. I'm learning new things all the time. Knight to f3 for Frode. Now this is called the East Indian and the Nimso Indian variation. The more the game goes on, the longer the variations are going to be. And the third move for Alexander is pawn goes to c5. The name doesn't change. And next move for Frode, the pawn goes to d5. He wants to occupy more space and have a pawn in the opponent's half of the board. And Alexander will place his pawn to d6, liberating the bishop on c8 that at least he go to d7. Continue now, knight to c3 for Frode. And Alexander will take the d5 pawn with his own pawn. We completed the first 5 moves. All of them are book moves. White, Frode has an advantage of 0.70. Usually white has an advantage for starting first. It is a little bit higher than the average advantage of white, but both players have played book moves, so they should be fine. The game will be decided much later. Frode takes a d5 pawn, and Alexander prepares to fianchetto. Pawn to g6, preparing to place later the bishop to g7. Pawn to h3 for Frode that doesn't want any nasty surprises like a bishop or a knight landing on g4. And also, Alexander doesn't like any nasty surprises with a knight landing on b5, and that's why he moves his pawn to a6. And Frode is afraid of a pawn going to b5, then perhaps attacking the knight. That's why he preempts by sending his pawn to a4. Queen to e7 for Alexander. And bishop to f4 for Frode. Alexander completes a fianchetto by placing his bishop to g7. But as you may see, we leave the book. Until here, we had book move until the ninth move of white, but ninth move of black is not a book move. It is a good, although the computer would prefer the knight to go to d7. Then the pawn goes to e3 for white, for Frode, so that his bishop from f1 is liberated, is not blocked by the e2 pawn any longer, and kingside castling for Alexander. We completed the first 10 moves, and white Frode has an advantage of 0.78. And let's continue. Continue with Frode, who sends his bishop to e2, and as you see, we return to book moves. How does this happen? The most likely explanation is that this position appears in opening theory, but it has been reached through a different order of moves compared to what the players played. That's why at some point it was not book theory. Now we're back to book theory again. Knight to d7 for Alexander, that also develops his knight. Kingside castling for Frode. And knight goes backwards to e8 for Alexander. You may wonder, why did it go backwards? Of course, to liberate the bishop of g7 that now controls most of the long diagonal that goes from a1 to h8. Still, we're in book, but we're going to leave the book now. After 12 moves, this is move 13 for white, and yes, it is the best move, but not in book. Rook to b8 for Alexander, that I believe he prepares to send the pawn to b5. Bishop to h2 for Frode, that doesn't want his bishop on f4 to be in any kind of danger. For example, if the pawn goes to g5, no, it's not attacked because the g5 pawn is attacked twice by the knight f3 and the bishop f4. Defender wants queen on e7, but doesn't want something like that to happen perhaps in two moves, pawn to h6 and then pawn to g5. And pawn to b5 for Alexander, that wants to get more space. But he's cut short with en passant. Frode will send his pawn to b6, and Alexander will take it back. We completed the first 15 moves. White's advantage has fallen a little bit to 0.59. White is still ahead, but it's not enough to decide the game. Let's see what's going to happen from now on. Frode continues with placing his queen to c2, and now White's development is complete. Other than the rooks and the king, all pieces have left the first rank. The two rooks communicate with each other. So for white, it's now where the middle game really starts. Knight to e5 for Alexander. Knight to d2 for Frode. And knight to c7 for Alexander. Black still has a bishop on c8 to develop. Rook to a5 for Frode, that tries to gain more space. Is ahead about one or two moves from the opening. And rook to b4 for Alexander. Pawn to b3 for Frode, who is trying to have this pawn protected as much as possible. Before it was protected only by the queen on c2. Now it's protected both by the queen on c2 and the knight on d2. And bishop to f5 Alexander, that threatens the white queen on c2. And as I have mentioned, the computer says it's inaccuracy. Would rather have the bishop go to b7 and be flanqued and control the wrong diagonal. Usually you don't try to just go for a one move threats. There's very, very, very small chance that Frode is going to miss it and leave his queen on c2. But usually you do it so that the opponent, instead of doing anything else, they must deal first with the threat. How will Alexander Chemukau Frode react to this threat? Instead of moving the queen, sends the pawn to e4 and attacks the bishop on f5. Now, can black take the pawn on e4? In the answer is no. We have to do the counting. The pawn on e4 is attacked twice. Rook b4, bishop f5. And this defended 3 times. Knight c3, queen c2, and knight d2. And to win a piece or a pawn or anything, you must have more attacking powers than defending powers. There are, of course, a few exceptions. If you attack with lower value pieces than the opponent defends, meaning if a piece attacked twice by pawns and is defended, can be defended many times, but with high value pieces, then yes, you can grab the piece. Yes, you're going to lose 2 pawns for the one piece, but you're ahead. But these are the exceptions. Here on, black cannot just take the pawn. So what is black going to do? Send the bishop all the way back to c8. And at this point, we continue the first 20 moves. Computer thinks a great move. White still has an advantage of 0.68. And let's see how the game is going to continue. Next move for Frode, rook to d1. Wants to centralize the rook. But why? The computer doesn't like it. Inaccuracy. Because both the F and the D files are closed. Rook to d4 for Alexander. Bishop to f4 for Frode. Computer thinks it's a mistake. Would rather have the bishop go to c4. By doing so, it blocks and constrains the rook on d4. Pawn to f5 for Alexander. That starts pawn storm, as it's called, along the f file, and the computer thinks a great move. And as you see, let's go again. Until now, in fact, until move number 21 for black, white was ahead, 0.59. And now after bishop to f4, now black is ahead. Very little, of course, just 0.29, but from now on, black is ahead. And after the great move of f5, black is ahead by 0.40. Let's see how game continues. Bishop to f3 for Frode. Computer thinks a mistake, and now black's advantage becomes significant. 1.47. And Alexander is going to continue pushing the pawn to f4. Brilliant, says the computer. And as you see, the white bishop, there's only one place to go from e3, take the rook on d4. Otherwise, where else can go? If it goes to f4, it's taken by the rook on f8. So bishop is going to take the rook on d4, and white will be ahead in material. And Alexander, of course, is going to take back the bishop with using the pawn on c5. Of course, the best. Materially, white is ahead by an exchange. That's why you see the +2, because the rook is 5 and the bishop is 3, so the difference is 2. Now that the knight on c3 is attacked, Frode will send it back to b1. In accuracy, the computer, in fact, the computer would rather have white sacrifice the knight. Computer would rather have bishop goes to f1. You see here. You see, bishop, let's see the little border will have right here. Yes, that is what would happen after bishop goes to f1. And d pawns, now, yes, it takes on c3, the knight. Queen takes on c3, and the computer thinks that this would be better for white than what happened in the game, or at least less bad. It doesn't seem so because, as you see, there is the knight, the bishop on g7, and the knight on e5. It's only the black knight on e5 that helps the white queen not be lost. If the knight on e5, now the black is going to play and can place the knight anywhere, and the queen is under attack. But we have to go with what actually happened. Knight goes to b1, and the pawn Alexander continues pushing his pawn to d3. You see here it is forking the queen on c2 and the bishop on e2. But that by itself is not a big problem because great most of the computer, what's happening is that if the bishop takes on d3, then and the knight takes back on d3, then the queen takes on d3, and white has an extra pawn. At this point, we continue the first 25 moves, and you see that Alexander with the black pieces has an advantage of 2.22, even though materially you see here white is ahead by the +2, meaning this the exchange that white won before when the bishop took the rook a few moves ago. And let's see how the game will continue. Bishop takes to d3 for white, and now white's material advantage is +3, even though overall the computer gives a 2.53 advantage for black. Pawn to f3 for Alexander. And now it seems the writing's on the wall. White is scared of what might happen on g2. If the pawn falls, of course, the king will take it back, but then the white king is very exposed. Of course, Frode could refuse to take the pawn and use it as a kind of a shield, but little by little, the black pieces will start coming, especially the f2 pawn is very vulnerable. That is why, as mentioned before, why I'm not sure if we mentioned it. That's why, in any case, Frode will place his bishop on f1. So if the pawn on g2 is taken, then the bishop can take it back. And that's exactly what happened. Alexander uses his f3 pawn to win the pawn on g2, and Frode will take it back with his bishop from f1. It seems the white king is quite exposed, but white has an advantage of +3, you see here, which starts becoming significant if they can thwart black's attack and go to an ending with +3. They have a great chance of winning. Let's see how the game will continue. Another brilliant move for Alexander because he's sacrificing his bishop for a pawn. Takes the pawn on h3, and Frode will take the bishop on h3. What else can white do? You see that white has an advantage of +5 materially. White is ahead by +5, meaning an entire rook. But the computer thinks that black is better, Alexander, by 3.66, which is significant. Queen goes to h4 for Alexander. His queen is near the white king. And what can Frode do? If he tries to save his bishop by placing it anywhere, for example, like g2, where else can it go and be safe? f1, anywhere else, it is going to be lost, yes. But if he plays it for either g2 or f1, then we have black, the queen takes the pawn on f2, and really the king is in a very precarious situation. That is why Frode will forget about his bishop and place his knight to f1 so that the queen from c2 covers the pawn on f2. Also, the knight on f1 covers squares h2 and g3 and e3. So the queen, Alexandra, wins the queen at h3. And we completed the first 30 moves. Black's advantage is significant. 4.39 for Alexander is very much ahead. And Alexander now has one brilliant and great move after another. At the end of the game, we're going to add all the exclamation marks because it seems that Alexander is going to get a huge number of exclamation marks. By exclamation, I mean you get one exclamation mark for the great move and two for the brilliant. We finish the first 30 moves and we are continuing near the end of the game. Let's see how long it will take. Near the end of the game doesn't mean too much. It may end next move or it may end 100 moves from now. Frode will place his knight on h2, controlling among others the f3 square and the g4. Bishop to h6 for Alexander. His bishop controls some very crucial squares in front of the white king, g5, f4, e3. Queen to c3 for Frode. If only he could exchange his queens, his worries would be over and he would go to winning endgame. But Alexander is not going to help. Knight goes to f3 with a check. Clearly the queen cannot take it. You lose the queen for a knight. But Frode can also take the knight with his own knight from f2. And Alexander will take the knight on f3 with his rook, not with his queen. So Frode cannot now exchange queens. If anything, he has to think what to do with his own queen that's in danger. And Frode thought, well, there's no way I can help my king, but let's take what is available. Let's win this wonderful knight on c7. So Frode has a great advantage of +5 when it comes to material, but the computer's evaluation is M2. And you see the letter M, it means mate. And the number next to that means in how many moves one can make. So if Alexander can see the combination, two-move combination for checkmate. But is he going to see it? Next move number 34 for Alexander, rook goes to g3 check. And computer thinks it's brilliant because black is sacrificing his rook. And of course, Frode has no alternative. He must take the rook. There's the only legal response. And at this point, you see that white has an advantage of +10, meaning materially, Frode is ahead by more than a queen, that's 9. But let's see how the game will end, because the computer says M1, which means mate next move. And is Alexander going to see it? Yep, bishop to e3 checkmate. You can see the white king has nowhere to go, and although white is ahead by +10, Frode has +10 because 9 for the queen and the two rooks another 10, 19, and 3 for the knight 22, and 4 for the pawns 26. What does black have? Queen 9 and 3 bishop 12 and 4 pawn 16. 26 versus 16 at material advantage for white, but what good is your advantage when your king has nowhere to go? Look at this king on g1. F1, H1, H2, and g2 are covered by the black queen, while f2 is covered by the black bishop. King nowhere to go. There is no piece that can go to f2 and block the check, and the bishop on e3 cannot be captured. And this concludes the game, and congratulations to Alexander. And we're going now to the review because I need to count how many exclamation marks did Alexander have. It seems quite a lot. And let's hit the review button. 95.5% for Alexander with a rating of 2500. That is finishing a little bit less than his 2604, but still it is very, very impressive. His opponent, Frode, had a rating a little lower than his own. The computer gave him 2050. 80.3% for Frode, 95.5 for Alexander. And let's see, out of the 35 moves, the top moves for Alexander 4 plus 3, 7, plus 12, 19, plus book 29 out of 35. But let's count the exclamation marks. 4 times 2, 8, plus 3, 11. So Alexander had 11 exclamation marks. I think this beats a record by one of my Greek Facebook friends who had 9, and we thought that that was great. Imagine now the 11 of Alexander Indjic. Let's go category by category. Brilliant moves, 4 for Alexander. I think this is the first time we see in this series that someone has 4 exclamation marks. It's extremely rare. When my Greek friend had 3 exclamation marks, we thought that was impressive. Imagine now the 4 4 brilliant moves by Alexander. Great moves, 3 for Alexander and 2 for Frode. Best 12 for Alexander, 7 for Frode. Excellent, 5 for Frode, 2 for Alexander. 1 good move each. Book moves, 11 for Frode, 10 for Alexander. And then in the, don't want to call it negative category, in the category of things to take into consideration, 2 inaccuracies for Frode, 1 for Alexander. 4 mistakes for Frode, 1 for Alexander. 2 misses for Frode, 1 for Alexander. And no blunders. And this concludes the coverage of this game. And let's go once again to look at the tournaments. Grecochess, as you see, nothing has changed. Same story. We have one player advancing, my scheme from Italy. Maxim Govorukha from the Ukraine is waiting to see if the hunting achievements will ever start the game or not. Well, there are 2 groups. Group 2, it is Barak 7 from Israel versus MGC 89 for Brazil. We both have 4 wins. And Group 3, it is myself, meaning the Hari from Greece, and the line from Hungary, 4 wins each. Waiting to see the games between them. And let's go to the other one that was hosted, that was organized by my Italian subscriber. The Underwater Moonlight, the 9 Moons tournament. How's it going? You see that first round, we are not exactly the middle, near the middle. We have completed 276 games, 372 to go. And let's see the various groups. Group 1, Lotus Time Chess from Japan has already 10 points. He's won 10 games. Very impressive. Group 2, 7 points with 7 wins from Spider 99 from from Croatia. Oh, I'm sorry, from Egypt. Group 3, this is the organizer, my subscriber Zanilo from Italy is ahead with 6 points. Group 4, Rishi Raj 3 from India ahead with 3 points. Group 5, Peon Perez from Palestine ahead with 8 points. Group 6, the tie between Munja 44 from Croatia and Matisse B 2008 from France. But Matisse B has 8 wins in 8 games, while Munja 44 has 8 wins and 2 losses. Just to mention, I have mentioned before, from each group, the top 3 advance. We have 9 groups of 9, so 27 people should advance to round 2. Now let's see group 7. Jendalf 66 from Uzbekistan is leading with 9 points, 9 wins. Group 8, my own. Khaled Khatab from Egypt and myself, Dahari from Greece, are leading with 3 points, but there's a difference. Khaled Khatab has 3 wins and 1 loss, while I have 3 wins and 5 losses. So things don't look that great for me. And Group 9, Hikaru Kalsenthal from India leads with 9 points. This concludes the coverage of this game. In the next video, we have one more game from the 2024 European champion, Alexander Indjic. And then we have a few more of my Facebook friends. Let's see if we have the list. Okay, don't have the list at this point. But we'll continue with one more game from Alexander. Then there are a couple of 2 or 3 other people that still remain from my Facebook friends. Thanks everybody for watching. Thanks to our viewers, especially thanks to the subscribers. If you have not subscribed yet, you may click the subscribe button, you become a subscriber, and you get notified of our videos. And of course, thanks to all the likes and the positive comments. I'm Carras Aniziris. This is my YouTube channel grecochess, the series of presenting games of my Facebook friends. Ladies and gentlemen, thanks for watching. Goodbye.